Hi guys, welcome to another true crime story time where I tell you one true crime case that was solved using forensic science, all while doing, that's right, by makeup. Today's video will be featuring the Glitters palette. Thank you so much to the subscriber who gifted this to me. It really does help support my channel when you guys send me stuff like this. All the other products I'm using in this video will be linked in the description below. I'm not gonna waste any more time. You guys already know the drill. I'm not a professional forensic pathologist, nor am I a professional makeup artist. I'm just the average girl at home like you, planning my makeup. Sometimes I do my nails while I talk about a true crime case. So if that's something you're into, then you are more than welcome to stick around and hit the subscribe button. Also, quick reminder, the comment section is a privilege. Don't fuck it up. Now let's get into today's case. So this story all takes place in May of 1992 in Huntsville, Alabama, where 47-year-old Betty Wilson lived with her husband, Jack Wilson. Jack and Betty had been married for 14 years and they each had 3 children from prior marriages. So they had these 3 kids from other marriages and then they got together. Betty and Jack Wilson lived together in their home in Huntsville, Alabama. Now Jack Wilson, he was 55 years old and he was a very well-known optometrist in the community. Jack really loved to help people. That was like his calling and his lot in life. And Jack would oftentimes give people free treatment because they couldn't afford it. That was the type of guy Jack was. Now Betty, she was a recovering alcoholic, no shame there. On the evening of May 22nd, 1992, she was returning home from an AA meeting. Betty and Jack were due to go on vacation the following day. So Betty had decided when she returned home, what's going on out there? You guys, I cannot wait to get out of Hollywood. I seriously am, I think I'm done with LA. Betty and Jack were supposed to go on vacation the following day, and Betty had a lot of last minute things that she needed to pack. I'm so sorry, you guys. Should I just like stop the storytelling and just show you what's going on outside of my window? That might be even more interesting than the story that I'm telling you today. So Jack and Betty had a vacation planned for the next day. They were supposed to go on vacation. And Betty just had a few last minute things that she wanted to pack. When she arrived home, she started to go upstairs to the bedroom. She said that as she was walking up the staircase and she rounded the corner to go up towards the landing where the bedrooms were, she said her head was down looking at the items that were in her hand. As she was rounding that corner, the light from the hallway hit her face and she looked up, and that is when she saw the most horrific thing she could possibly ever see in her life: her husband Jack laying in a pool of blood. It was obvious based off of the scene that Jack was no longer alive. In an absolute panic, Betty calls 911. She is screaming, she is upset, and she's telling them that she just found her husband laying in a pool of blood and he's dead. When the Huntsville Police Department arrived on the scene, they were met with the body of a white male lying in the hallway in a pool of blood. He had been beaten to death and stabbed. Lying next to the victim, they found a 34-inch metal baseball bat, which they would believe was one of the murder weapons. The baseball bat was covered in blood. They did not, however, find the knife that was used to stab Jack. So the assailant possibly had most likely taken it with them. I mean, why would he leave the bat behind but then take the knife? Both are murder weapons. I would think if they were trying to like cover their tracks and take the murder weapon, they would take both murder weapons and not just the one. I don't know. It's kind of strange. In Jack Wilson's bedroom, crime scene investigators found a green ski mask laying on the bed. The telephone line had been cut. They also found a box for a pistol that was open, but the gun was not in there, so somebody obviously took the gun. Could this possibly be the murder weapon? As investigators continued to search the residence, they found no sign that it had been a burglary. Outside of Jack, nothing seemed to be out of place or unusual in the home. There wasn't anything taken or stolen. Like, none of the valuables were missing from the Wilsons' home. There was Jack's wallet, which was laying on the floor near his shoe. His wallet didn't have any cash in it, but there were credit cards that were still in there. If it was a burglary, why hadn't they taken the credit cards or any valuables in a home? Quickly, police came to the conclusion that this was not a burglary. Well, it didn't appear to be any sign of forced entry. Police brought Betty into the station for questioning because obviously she was the one who found Jack. She also is the closest to Jack. Police always like to look into whoever the closest was to the victim as the suspect first. Oftentimes, law enforcement will try to rule out family members and whoever is the closest to the victim. And Betty told them that she had no idea who would want Jack dead, like who would do that to him. She said that Jack was an amazing guy, that he gave her everything she ever could have wanted. I mean, wow, girl. She said that he was great to her and her children and her grandchildren. She said he was a sincere, honest, straightforward type of person, and that's the reason why everyone loved him so much, and just that he was a lot of fun to be with. So sound like Jack was a pretty amazing guy. So what happened? Who could have wanted such an amazing guy like Jack dead? As police began their investigation, right away they got their first clue. An informant called in. Now, this informant had called in a day prior to Jack's murder. So the body was sent over to the medical examiner for analysis, and the first thing the medical examiner noticed was the lacerations on Jack's body. There was a series of different types of lacerations to his body. His skull had been fractured. He also suffered from a fractured hyoid bone in his neck, as well as his right shoulder had punctured wounds. His right and left arm both were fractured. It was a very, very brutal beating. Right away, the forensic pathologist was able to tell that these were defensive wounds that were done to his arms, that Jack Wilson had tried to fight back. He was trying to fight off his attacker. That always bothers me, you know, to know that they were like really trying to fight back and just didn't make it. It's just like, dang. You know, there was also stab wounds to his abdominal area. Honestly, to me, it sounded like somebody was with a personal motive. Like, why would you need to stab somebody that amount of times unless it was something personal, someone that's really vindictive? Jack's death was officially ruled as a homicide with blunt force trauma to the head. Now, the bat that was used, remember they found that bat at the crime scene, they sent that over to the forensics lab for testing, and it came back positive for Jack Wilson's blood. So that was Jack's blood on the bat. I mean, you can put two and two together. We could have figured that out on our own. The next thing they did was to dust the metal bat for prints. The bat came back clean. There was no fingerprints found on the bat. So with no fingerprints and no leads in the case, police had no choice but to return to the information they had received from the informant before. So they went back to speak to this informant. The informant said that they were very concerned because they overheard a conversation with a man. They overheard a conversation with a man who said that he was going to be in Huntsville that same time. And according to them, he was going there to someone. YouTube is cracking down, guys. Why police hadn't followed up on this lead before, I have no idea. Police discovered the identity of the man. His name was James White. He was a handyman at Vincent Elementary School in Vincent, Alabama. Police did a background check on James White, and they found out that he did have a troubled past. He had a lot of issues with substance abuse, and he had been honorably discharged from the military. He also had a criminal record. Now, James, he lived on the outskirts of Vincent, Alabama, in like a rural area, and he lived in a trailer. He did have children. They actually attended the same elementary school that he was working as a handyman at. Here's the twist, you guys. Vincent's children was the only one that was at that elementary school. Betty Wilson had a twin sister named Peggy Lou. And Peggy Lou was a first grade teacher at Vincent Elementary School, the same school that James White worked at. What are the chances of that? That's ironic. Not. That's crazy, right? But it also made sense as to how he would have known the Wilsons. Maybe he found out where the Wilsons lived because Peggy Lou was talking about it. They didn't know what to think yet, but this was a weird link. Investigators wasted no time and they got a search warrant and they searched James White's trailer. When they searched his trailer, they found a pair of tennis shoes. And on the tennis shoes, they found what appeared to be blood. They sent the shoes off to the forensics lab for testing. And when it came back, it was in fact positive for blood. And not only was it positive for blood, but it came back as the same type of blood that Jack Wilson had. It wasn't necessarily positively ID'd as Jack's blood, but it was his same blood type. I mean, put two and two together, y'all. I mean, same blood type. I'm thinking, okay, same thing. Next to James White's trailer, there was an abandoned house on that same lot, that in the rural area where he lived. And police also searched that house as well, and they found a revolver. The same type of revolver that was missing from the Wilson family home. When they checked the registration, they found that the gun belonged to none other than Betty Wilson. Girl, it's not looking good, Betty. I don't know what you were doing, but this does not look right. Now, we could just assume that he broke into the home and that he stole the gun. That could have very well happened, but I'm gonna tell you right now, my investigative instincts are telling me otherwise. It's telling me something ain't right, Betty. They also searched James's white pickup truck, the one that he would drive regularly to work, and they found a book inside the truck. It was a poetry book that had been taken out from the public library. Back in the day, when you would take a book out of a library, you would sign your name and the date on it. If I'm not mistaken, it would have like their signature. And guess whose signature was in the book? Let's just say it together. Betty Wilson. That is right. Girl, are you kidding me? It's really not looking good, girl. Do they have something going on? Like, what's going on? Is this her lover? Did he just like decide to steal all of Betty's things from the home? Why does her sister, her twin sister, her identical twin sister work with him? It just like, it's not making sense, but at the same time, it is making sense. Police quickly turned their attention over to Betty and her twin sister, Peggy Lou, because it's looking like they all in cahoots at this point. Police bring in James White for questioning. They interrogated him for about 10 hours. And at some point, he just broke down and told them that he was in fact inside of the Wilson family home. He had been on some binge drinking and drug use for the last 3 or 4 days before he had went there. And he said that Jack had discovered that he was in the home and they got into a bit of a scruffle. He said he doesn't remember what happened because he was so high from all of the drugs that he had been doing and the drinking that he had been doing, that all he remembers is that he wanted to get away from Jack. He said he did remember hitting Jack and Jack let him go at that point, but he said he didn't remember any baseball bats being around, but that he later heard that Jack had been beaten with a baseball bat, but to his recollection and knowledge, there hadn't been a bat around, so he doesn't know where that came from. I don't know if he was trying to say that the police planted it or what he was trying to say, but he was just like, I don't remember a bat being there, but y'all say there was a bat, so I guess so, but I just remember that I did hit him. Sorry, it got dark outside. Police arrested James White and charged him with the murder of Jack Wilson. It appeared as though they had finally got their guy, but investigators were a little suspicious, especially about Betty Wilson. It just really didn't make sense. As the case would progress and they would speak to James White multiple times, he began to reveal a lot more information about the night of the murder. He told investigators that Betty Wilson and her twin sister Peggy Lou had hired him to kill Jack Wilson for $5,000. $5,000? Are you kidding me? That's not even enough to buy Pampers with for a baby. I don't understand people. I don't understand those people for sure. And with all of the circumstantial evidence that they found in James's car, his trailer, and the house next door to him that belonged to Betty Wilson, the circumstantial evidence was definitely pointing towards the two sisters having something to do with this. But why? Why would they want to harm Jack? As they investigated more into Betty and after questioning her, police discovered that Betty and Jack had a rather unconventional relationship. You see, the two of them were staying in separate bedrooms, which to me is not that bad. I definitely want my own room. Okay? I just need my space. You have your room, I have my room. We get together in each other's room when we want to, and then we go back to our room. I don't want your man things in my woman things, because girl, I be doing all types of stuff in my room that I don't need my husband to see. That's none of your business. That's none of your business. That's none of your business. Because I know y'all think dirty brains. No, I mean, like, I just need my time to do my thing, to meditate, whatever I want, to be me in my space without another person, and then we can do stuff together too. So the two of them had separate bedrooms, and Betty admitted to police that she had had a number of affairs while married to Jack. And the reason being is because Jack suffered from a disease called Crohn's disease. Because he had this disease, he had to wear an ostomy bag, and Betty wasn't feeling that. It wasn't doing it for her during the sexy time, which I can understand. Although if I already married my husband, I mean, that's just what I agreed to, so I would still do it anyway. I would try to make it the most enjoyable I could. Maybe throw some comedy in there. I don't know. I try something. I do my best, girl, to liven it up. I try my best. And that's it. Like, we try something. I don't know. Like, she didn't hold back. She told investigators that she found that bag, like the whole thing, absolutely repulsive. And there was no way that she was going to have sex with him. Like, there was just no way she could physically do the act. At this point, police is starting to think that this is a motive for Betty wanting him dead. Like, she had already had a number of affairs. Maybe she felt stuck and trapped in the marriage and that she couldn't get out. And the only way to do that was to get rid of him. Also, Betty would receive quite a bit of money from Jack's estate because he had about $6 million worth in the estate. So she would receive the majority of that $6 million. Although they had all of this new information coming up, they still didn't have any real solid evidence Betty or Peggy had anything to do with it. They had a lot of circumstantial evidence. They had a lot of different clues that pointed to them, but there was nothing that really tied them directly to the murders. So at this point, police needed something solid in order to prosecute the two women. So the prosecution cut a deal with James White, defense attorney, and they told him if he would put in writing what he had told them, that Betty and Peggy were the ones who hired him to kill Jack, that they would cut him some sort of deal. And in return, James White would get a reduced sentence. So that was the deal. As long as he would implement the two ladies in the murder, he would get a reduced sentence. So obviously he had a reason to go ahead now and say that the two ladies were involved. So I don't know if you can really trust it, because maybe he's just trying to get a reduced sentence, so that's the reason why he wanted to implicate them. Or is it that they really did have something to do with it and he's like, well, I might as well tell if I'm going down anyway and I'm gonna get a reduced sentence. It's like, you can't really trust a murderer, criminal. Now it's time to go into the palette. But anyway, back to the story. I did it, and it didn't break this time. The sisters did go on trial, and they were trialed separately. Betty Wilson went on trial first because she was like the main suspect in the case. According to James's testimony, as well as the autopsy reports that kind of backed up what he was saying, he said that he arrived to the Wilson family home and waited in the bedroom, and that Jack came home around 5 p.m. And this story was corroborated by neighbors saying that they saw Jack come home around 5 p.m., that Jack had went into his front yard and nailed a sign in the lawn with a metal baseball bat. Investigators did find the metal baseball bat near his body. This was probably the same bat that he had been beaten with. According to James, at this time, Jack came back inside of the house and headed upstairs to his bedroom. At some point, James changed his mind and he did not want to kill Jack anymore. And he tried to leave the bedroom, but when he tried to leave the bedroom, he ran straight into Jack. And obviously, Jack was shocked that some intruder was in his home, and a fight broke out. So they began to struggle and go back and forth. James said that he was just trying to get out. He just wanted to get away. And so he did hit Jack. As an attempt to escape, he ran outside of the house, and that is when he met up with Betty, who then drove him to his truck so that he could drive home. So forensic scientists got a hold of Betty's vehicle and they did a whole analysis on her vehicle. They dusted for prints, they looked for hairs and fibers, trying to find anything that would link James to being in her car during the time that he said he was. However, nothing came back. They found no sign of evidence that James had been inside of Betty's car at all. I mean, it's possible she could have got the car cleaned. That's possible too. I don't know if they thought of that. With no physical evidence, the prosecution had no choice but to try a different route, and they began to attack Betty Wilson's character. So they started saying a lot of bad things about her, how she was cheating on her husband, and how she had an alcohol problem because, you know, she was an alcoholic, so she was going to AA meetings. They even brought in one of Betty Wilson's ex-lovers, and he testified on the stand about what they would do and everything like that. This helps to build an idea or an image about a person, and so they really made her look bad. I mean, I can't say they made her look bad. She made herself look bad because she actually did it. With all of this evidence, including the ex-lover taking the stand, the jury found Betty Wilson guilty of capital murder, and she was charged to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, her lawyers tried to overturn this. So now the prosecution wanted to nail Betty's twin sister, Peggy, because they believed she also had something to do with it. And they were like, oh, heck no, we are going for the gold. Almost 8 months after Betty had went on trial, Peggy was now on trial, and the prosecution did not have that much evidence against Peggy whatsoever. Couldn't use anything about Peggy's character because honestly, Peggy's background looked squeaky clean. She was a first grade teacher. She was active in her local church. She would volunteer a lot in her community. She was married and she was a singer in the choir at her church. So like, I mean, she looked like an absolute saint compared to her sister. Now, Peggy Lou's attorney, he was very, very intelligent, and he went over all of the documents and testimonies from her twin sister's Betty's trial so that he could prepare himself. And one thing that he pointed out and he noticed was that James White had never admitted to actually killing Jack Wilson. He never said that he did it. He just said he hit him over the head and Jack let him go and he left. But everyone else had presumed that he had stabbed him. Also because when James had gave his testimony to the media, he told the media that he had no recollection of a baseball bat, that police actually were the ones who told him that a baseball bat was there. So they implemented the baseball bat situation and he hadn't really had that knowledge. So it wasn't like that was knowledge that James had offered up to investigators. It was knowledge that investigators had told him, like, hey, he was hit with a baseball bat, you hit him with the baseball bat, and then he agreed to it. So it kind of seemed like it could be coercion of a sorts, and this was a loophole for Peggy's attorney. I don't know why it wasn't a loophole for Betty's attorney either, but I mean, I guess they just wanted to nail Betty. They did not like Betty. The public did not like Betty. James said that he was struggling with Jack. He said in court that he probably grabbed the bat, most likely, and hit Jack over the head with the bat, but that he had no recollection of it, but most likely that's what had happened based off of what the cops told him and what he knew. The other thing that Peggy's attorneys were kind of taken back on and didn't really believe, they were kind of skeptical as to how he would have done such a thing with a baseball bat, because how could one man beat him so badly with a baseball bat and also stab him that many times? They just felt like that was weird, and that there was no way that he could have done it alone. They were also questioning why, if this was the case that he had done it, why hadn't there been blood spatter patterns that would have suggested or indicated that that's what occurred? Which actually, that's a good point. Now, Peggy Lou's defense attorney took the crime scene photos and the autopsy report to Georgia to meet up with the lead medical examiner over there. Their medical examiner said that if Jack had been struck with the bat the way that the prosecution was claiming, then there would have been a blood spatter pattern. There would have been cast off blood spatter patterns, all types of things. And this was just not consistent with what the prosecution was saying that had happened. So the second medical examiner, he agreed to testify at trial on behalf of Peggy Lou's case, saying that the way the prosecution is claiming that the murder happened didn't happen that way based off of the evidence found at the crime scene. The prosecution put James White on the stand again against Peggy Lou because they're like, nobody can beat this guy's testimony. But this time, it wouldn't have the same effect as it did in Betty's trial. The defense would argue with the jury how they were able to believe a man who had such a troubled past, who was basically a criminal and convicted of all sorts of things that I can't even say because YouTube will shut me down, but like they were accusing him of like child things along with everything else. Yeah, so I don't know how much of that is true, but that's what they put in their argument. The second medical examiner's testimony was crucial in Peggy Lou's case because he testified that almost always with any sort of crime scene like that, when someone is hit with a blunt force object, he said especially with a metal bat, there should have been not just blood transfer onto the bat, especially with the lacerations, but there also should have been like hairs from Jack on the bat, which there weren't. He was able to convince the jury that this was just not consistent with what had occurred whatsoever. They were like, yeah, we gotta agree. That can't be how it happened. I mean, it's one thing to ignore like circumstantial evidence, is another thing to ignore physical scientific evidence, which they just couldn't. And he had some good points. He also said that he felt like the lacerations that were found on Jack's body were not consistent with that of a baseball bat for sure. It had to be something else. He said that baseball bats cause skull crushing injuries and will actually crush in the bones of a skull, equivalent to cracking an egg. Did we really need that visual? I don't think so. Yeah, let me try to go to sleep tonight with that in my head. He felt that the injuries were consistent with something like a fireplace poker. He said that that would explain the puncture wounds as well, because a bat wouldn't make puncture wounds like that, and that's probably the reason why they never found a knife. There was no way that this guy was using a bat and crushing this man's body, his head, his skull, both of his arms, hitting him in the abdomen area with a bat and also using a knife. That's a lot. The only thing that could actually do that would be a fireplace poker, like could do both. No one knew how the lacerations got there. Did Betty have a fireplace poker? Did Peggy have a fireplace poker? Like, where's this fireplace? Like, nobody knew that. It also fit the patterns of the bruises, markings, and wounds found on Jack's body. Then there was like some sort of conspiracy theory that was going around that 3 people had actually carried out the murder and had murdered him somewhere else and then came back to the home to dump his body there to make it look like the crime scene. That was also a theory. Had Betty, Peggy, and James all conspired to murder Jack? Is that what happened? And then the 3 of them went up there and carried out together, or they murdered him somewhere else and then brought him back there. There was a poetry book in the car, remember, that had Betty's name in it. Maybe he and Betty was into some sort of thing. Maybe they were in an entanglement. We don't know. He agreed to help her, and that's the reason why he's taking the full rap for everything. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. It's just looking really, really weird. It's really hard to tell in this case what really happened. The prosecution argued that it didn't matter because James White was dead, and it didn't matter who actually did it. If Peggy had conspired to do it, she was still a part of it. However, in order for them to actually convict Peggy, that means that the jury would have to believe James White's story, and it just wasn't consistent with the scientific evidence at the crime scene. So for that reason, the jury did not agree with James White's version of the story. At this point, I'm thinking they all had something to do with it, child, because it's too much back and forth. Like, seriously, reading about this case, it was giving me whiplash, girl. It was whiplashing because there was just so many back and forth stories. Peggy Lou's attorney came up with this scenario. He said that at least 2 individuals had attacked him. So the picture that they were trying to paint was that it was more than one person, possibly 2 people. They believed that whoever murdered Jack wrapped him in a tarp, brought him inside the home, and staged the home to make it look like he was murdered there, but instead he was murdered somewhere else. Crime scene investigators also found a blood smear on the base of the wall that came from Jack's head. Also, looking at the crime scene photos, it appeared as though the body had been swirled around in a circle. This is what gave them the idea that the body had probably been somewhere else and then placed there. Somebody intentionally smeared the baseball bat with blood to make it appear like he had been beaten with the bat, when really he had been beaten with a fireplace rod. It took the jury less than 2 hours to deliberate, and they came back with a not guilty verdict in the case of Peggy Lou. So Peggy Lou got off, but her sister Betty did not. Like, what in the heck happened in this case? I just feel like I really still don't know the truth about what happened in this case. Was it Betty? Was it Betty and Peggy together? Was it all 3 of them? Was it Betty, Peggy, and James? Or was it James by himself who placed the blame on Betty and Peggy? I don't know. I still am so confused, and I feel like we still do not have all the answers in this case. Thanks to forensic science and some good police work, Betty Wilson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Peggy Lou's case, the verdict was not guilty and she was set free. She is now a free woman to roam the earth. James White avoided the death sentence by implementing the 2 women in the crime. And so he did get a reduced sentence. He didn't have to go to the electric chair, because if he got convicted, girl, he was about to go to the electric chair. What did you guys think about this case and my makeup look? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like videos like these, you can check out my other episodes. I'll leave them linked on the screen right here. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Please share because it really helps me out. And I'll see you guys next time with another true crime story time. Bye.